I sat across from her at the same cafe table where I'd held her hand through both divorces, where I'd helped her rebuild after losing her home in the flood, where I'd spent countless nights researching specialists when her son was diagnosed. 10 years of midnight emergency runs, of hospital waiting rooms, of helping her move 5 times when she couldn't afford movers, of Christmas mornings when she had nowhere else to go. Now, as she casually checked her phone, not even looking up as she spoke, she said, "We were never really friends, you know that, right?" The birthday card she'd given me last month still sat on my nightstand, the words "Soul Sisters Forever" suddenly feeling like a cruel joke etched in glitter. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper, as if my lungs had suddenly forgotten how to push air. Shirley glanced up from her phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Come on, Nancy. Let's be honest with each other. We've been convenient acquaintances. That's all." I stared at her, searching for any sign this was some cruel joke. The Shirley I knew had sobbed in my arms when her second husband left, had called me at 3 a.m. when Tyler was rushed to the emergency room with his first serious asthma attack, had lived on my couch for 2 months after the flood. "Shirley, I don't understand. Last week you called me your lifeline when Tyler's specialist appointment got moved up." She shrugged, taking a sip of her latte, the one I'd paid for, like I had so many times before. "That's what people say, Nancy. It's called being polite." My chest tightened as if someone were standing on it. 10 years of friendship was just politeness? Friendship is a strong word. She scrolled through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. "Let's call it a mutually beneficial arrangement." The cafe around us continued its normal hum, the espresso machine hissing, customers chatting, someone laughing by the window, while my world silently imploded. How could she rewrite our entire history with such casual cruelty? "This doesn't make sense," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What about last Christmas when you said I was the only family you had? What about Tyler's graduation when you thanked me in your speech for being there through everything?" Shirley sighed, finally putting her phone down and meeting my eyes with a cold detachment I'd never seen before. "Nancy, you've always been intense. You took casual comments too seriously. You built this up in your head to be something it wasn't." I felt dizzy, memories suddenly rearranging themselves. The late-night calls, the emergencies, the times I'd rescheduled my life to accommodate her needs. Had I imagined the significance of it all? "Why now?" I managed to ask. "Why are you saying this now?" "I'm trying to streamline my life," she said, as if discussing a closet reorganization. "Clarifying relationships. Being more authentic." My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Diane, a mutual friend. "What happened with Shirley? She's telling everyone you've been smothering her for years. Are you okay?" I showed Shirley the message, hands shaking. "Is that what you're telling people?" She had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I'm just being honest about how I felt. After everything we've been through," I said, memories flashing through my mind, holding her hair back as she vomited during chemotherapy, helping Tyler with college applications when she was too exhausted from treatments, organizing the fundraiser that paid her medical bills. "After everything, that's exactly what I'm talking about," she interrupted. "You keep a mental ledger of everything you've done for me. That's not friendship, Nancy. That's keeping score." I stood up, gathering my purse. "I never kept score, Shirley. I just thought what we had was real." She was already looking at her phone again. "Maybe take this as an opportunity for personal growth. Find some new friends. You've always been a bit dependent." As I walked out, legs unsteady, another text came through, from Tyler, Shirley's son, who I'd helped raise since he was 8. "Mom told me not to talk to you anymore. I don't understand what's happening. I'm sorry." In my car, I finally broke, tears blurring the road ahead as I pulled away from the cafe. The dashboard clock read 2:17 p.m. I would always remember this moment, the exact time I learned that a decade of what I thought was friendship had apparently been nothing but an elaborate performance, the birthday card with "Soul Sisters Forever." written in Shirley's looping handwriting, seemed to mock me from the corner of my eye, thrown onto the passenger seat in my hurry to escape the cafe. Just 4 weeks ago, she had given it to me with a tearful hug, thanking me for always being her rock. Now I wondered if anything between us had ever been real at all. Our friendship, or what I'd believed was friendship, began in a hospital waiting room. Shirley's father was having heart surgery. My mother was there for her final round of radiation. We shared coffee from a vending machine that dispensed liquid the color of motor oil and the consistency of warm syrup. We laughed about it, that desperate laugh people find in places of sorrow. By morning, we had exchanged numbers. I can pinpoint exactly when the pattern established itself. 3 weeks after we met, Shirley called at midnight, sobbing because her first husband had cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. Without hesitation, I drove to her apartment, helped her call credit card companies and the bank, then stayed the weekend to help her sort through finances. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she had whispered, clutching my hand. "You're the sister I never had." Those early years were filled with Shirley's emergencies, financial troubles after the divorce, the flood that destroyed her rented house, health scares before her actual diagnosis. Through it all, I was there, rearranging my life to fit around her needs. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer 7 years into our friendship, I used all my vacation days to drive her to treatments. The strange thing, I never felt burdened. I loved being the person she relied on. I treasured the moments when her guard dropped, when she'd curl up on my couch and tell me I was the only one who really understood her. "My sun rises and sets with you, Nance," she once told me, tipsy on wine after her remission celebration. "Don't ever leave me." But there were warning signs I had willfully ignored. Shirley rarely asked about my life, and when she did, her attention wandered before I finished speaking. Invitations to my events were often declined last minute with elaborate excuses. Plans were flexible when they were hers, written in stone when they were mine. After her recovery, Shirley landed a marketing position at a prestigious firm. Her social media accounts, once filled with pictures of us together, gradually became showcases for her new colleagues and networking events. When I was tagged, it was usually in throwback posts about her cancer journey, where I was referred to as her cancer buddy rather than her best friend. I scrolled through her Instagram now, sitting in my living room surrounded by framed photos of us. Shirley and me at Tyler's high school graduation, at her cancer-free celebration, at my 40th birthday party, where she had given a speech about our unbreakable bond. The most recent photos told a different story. Shirley with her new colleagues at rooftop parties, captioned with "Finally found my tribe," and "When you meet your real friends later in life." I'd noticed, of course I had. But I'd made excuses. She was busy. She was building her career. She needed to network. I never confronted her about pulling away because I was afraid of exactly what had happened today at the cafe. The night before Tyler's college move-in, Shirley had broken down. "I can't do this alone," she had sobbed over the phone. I spent the entire night helping her pack his things, then drove 5 hours to his campus, unloaded everything while she handled the emotional side, then drove them both home when she was too exhausted. 2 years ago, I had taken out a personal loan to help cover Tyler's tuition when her contribution fell short. "I'll pay you back," she had promised. "You're saving Tyler's future." The loan payments still came out of my account each month. The cruelest part was thinking about the times she had seemed genuinely there for me, holding my hand at my mother's funeral, bringing soup when I had pneumonia, listening when a promising relationship ended badly. Had those moments been genuine, or just the minimum maintenance required to keep me available for her next crisis? I thought about Christmas mornings at my house, when she and Tyler had nowhere else to go. About the 5 times I'd helped her move when she couldn't afford movers, about the specialist I'd found for Tyler's asthma after spending nights researching options. 10 years of my life reorganized around her needs, her emergencies, her schedule. We were never really friends, you know that, right? The words echoed in my head as I stared at the evidence of our intertwined lives, wondering how someone could so casually erase a decade of what I had thought was the most important relationship in my life. 3 days after the cafe, a box appeared on my doorstep. No note, just my belongings that had accumulated at Shirley's house over the years, a favorite sweater, books I'd lent her, the emergency key to her apartment, and, oddly, the photo albums I'd made documenting our friendship. 10 years reduced to a cardboard box, not even worth a conversation. Inside, among my returned possessions, was the bracelet I'd given her when she finished chemotherapy, a delicate silver chain with 2 intertwined hearts I'd saved for months to afford. Seeing it discarded among old phone chargers and mismatched Tupperware felt like a physical blow. My phone had been mercifully silent from Shirley herself, but buzzing constantly with messages from mutual friends. "Nancy, what happened?" texted Kim, who we'd met in Shirley's support group. "Shirley's telling everyone you had some kind of obsessive breakdown." "Just checking on you," wrote Michael, who had dated me briefly until Shirley needed emergency help moving the same weekend as our planned getaway. "Heard things got weird between you and Shirley." The stories filtering back to me varied, but the theme remained consistent. I had misinterpreted our relationship, had become clingy and possessive, had finally forced Shirley to establish healthy boundaries. In this revised history, my years of support had been transformed into something unsettling, almost predatory. I didn't recognize myself in these descriptions, yet didn't have the energy to defend myself. How do you explain a decade of friendship to people who've already accepted another version of events? Work became a refuge until I discovered that, even there, Shirley's influence had reached. My boss called me into her office, expression concerned. "Nancy, is everything all right? Shirley mentioned you might be going through something when she called about the Henderson project." The Henderson project, my project, which Shirley had no connection to whatsoever. "Shirley called about my project?" I asked, confusion momentarily overriding hurt. "She offered to take it over if you needed time off," my boss explained, watching me carefully. "Said she was concerned about your emotional state." The calculated precision of it left me breathless. Not content with rewriting our past, Shirley seemed determined to control my narrative in the present as well. I reassured my boss I was fine, then locked myself in a bathroom stall, pressing my forehead against the cool metal door. The project represented a potential promotion, something Shirley knew I'd been working toward. Her concern could have sabotaged my career while positioning her as both compassionate and professionally valuable. That evening, I collapsed on my couch, emotionally exhausted. My phone pinged with a notification. Shirley had posted photos from a dinner party with several of our mutual friends. The caption read, "So grateful for friends who've been there through everything. My heart is full." I recognized the restaurant. It was where we had planned to celebrate my upcoming birthday. The next morning, I woke to an email from the alumni committee we both served on. Shirley had apparently submitted some of my research for a presentation without crediting me. When confronted by the committee chair, she claimed it had been collaborative and that I had agreed to share credit. The accumulated weight of these betrayals finally broke something loose inside me. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by the contents of the returned box, and sobbed until my throat was raw. Not just for the friendship I'd lost, but for the realization that it might never have existed as I'd understood it. My doorbell rang that afternoon. Tyler stood on my porch, looking uncertain and so much like the 8-year-old boy I'd first met that my heart contracted. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," he said quickly. I don't understand what's happening. You're family to me." I invited him in, careful not to disparage Shirley despite everything. He was caught in the middle and I wouldn't make it worse for him. "Your mom and I see our relationship differently," I said finally. "That happens sometimes. But after everything you've done for us." His face clouded with confusion. After the tuition help and the hospital stays and Tyler, I interrupted gently. Sometimes people need different things at different points in their lives. What I couldn't tell him was that his mother had apparently needed me when I was useful, and now that her career was thriving, her cancer was in remission, and he was successfully launched into adulthood, I had become dispensable. As he left, Tyler hugged me tightly. "This isn't right," he whispered. "I'm sorry." That night, I removed Shirley's birthday card from my nightstand, the words "Soul Sisters Forever" now feeling like evidence of a lie I'd been too willing to believe. I placed it in the box with my returned possessions and pushed it into the back of my closet. I wasn't ready to throw it away. But I wasn't ready to look at it either. 2 weeks after Shirley's casual demolition of our friendship, I found myself sitting at my dining room table surrounded by evidence of the past decade. Text message threads printed and organized chronologically. Emails saved to folders. Financial records of loans and gifts carefully documented. Birthday cards and handwritten notes spread out like artifacts from an archaeological dig of a civilization that apparently never existed. This hadn't been my idea. It was my therapist, Dr. Reeves, who suggested I objectively examine the relationship dynamic instead of relying solely on my emotional memory. "This isn't about proving Shirley wrong," Dr. Reeves had explained. "It's about understanding what happened so you can process it and move forward." So here I was, conducting a post-mortem on a 10-year friendship, searching for signs I'd missed or patterns I'd overlooked. The evidence was overwhelming and painfully clear. In the first year alone, I had dropped everything to help Shirley 17 separate times. When her first husband left, I had spent 36 consecutive hours helping her sort through the financial wreckage. During her cancer treatments, I had used all 20 vacation days to drive her to appointments, sitting through 8-hour chemotherapy sessions while juggling work emails from my laptop. Most revealing were the text exchanges. Messages from Shirley typically began with emergencies and requests for help, followed by effusive gratitude and declarations of our special bond. Messages from me showed consistent check-ins, offers of support, and enthusiastic responses to her rare invitations. I had known our friendship was imbalanced. That much I'd acknowledged even to myself. What I hadn't realized was the extent of the imbalance, or the apparent calculation behind it. My phone rang, startling me from my analysis. It was Kim, one of our mutual friends. "Nancy? I need to talk to you about Shirley." I braced myself for another round of Shirley's revised history, but Kim surprised me. "I heard her talking at Melissa's dinner party," she said, voice lowered as if Shirley might somehow overhear. "She was laughing about how you'd basically been her personal assistant for years. Someone asked if she felt bad about cutting you off, and she said." Kim paused. "Nancy, she said you were a convenient resource, but had served your purpose." The clinical cruelty of it stung, but beneath the pain was something unexpected: confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the friendship or misinterpreted its significance. Shirley had deliberately cultivated my support while privately devaluing it. "There's more," Kim continued hesitantly. "She's been using your research for that community development proposal. She's presenting it next week as her own work." My research. The community development project I'd spent 2 years compiling data for, interviewing residents of underserved neighborhoods, creating actionable proposals for urban renewal. Shirley had access to it because I'd shared everything when she expressed interest in learning more. "Thank you for telling me," I managed, mind already racing with implications. After hanging up, I pulled out my laptop and checked the professional networking site where presentations were often shared in our field. There it was, Shirley listed as the presenter for Neighborhood Revitalization, a community-centered approach. My exact title. My exact research. That I dug deeper, finding 3 other instances where Shirley had repurposed my work without attribution. In one case, she'd received a significant professional accolade for a framework I had developed. The evidence mounted, I found myself searching for other former friends of Shirley's. People who had once been fixtures in her life who had suddenly disappeared. It wasn't difficult to find them: Sarah, who had been Shirley's best friend before me; Jason, who had been her rock during her divorce from her first husband; Melissa, who had been her emotional support during college. One by one, I reached out with careful, neutral messages. One by one, they responded with stories eerily similar to mine, years of one-sided support followed by abrupt dismissal when their usefulness had expired. She told me we were never really friends after I helped her pass her qualifying exams, Sarah wrote. 10 years of friendship erased in a single conversation. The pattern was undeniable. Shirley collected people who would support her through difficult periods, extracted maximum value from these relationships, then discarded them when circumstances changed or when they began requiring reciprocity. I gathered this evidence. Not for confrontation, but for my own understanding, a peculiar calm began replacing the hurt and confusion. This wasn't about my worthiness as a friend. It was about Shirley's pattern of using people as resources rather than forming genuine connections. I was just the latest in a line of disposable supporters, valued for function rather than affection. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it shifted my perspective. For the first time since that day at the café, I could see beyond the devastation of losing what I thought was my closest friendship to the possibility that something healthier awaited me on the other side of this grief. What do you actually want from this situation? Dr. Reeves asked during our 4th session. Setting aside what you feel Shirley deserves, what outcome would help you move forward? I considered the question carefully. My initial impulse, to make Shirley acknowledge the reality of our friendship and the damage she'd caused by dismissing it, was both unlikely and ultimately unsatisfying. I want to protect my professional reputation, I said finally. I want to maintain relationships with mutual friends who matter to me. I want to help Tyler if he needs it without interfering in his relationship with his mother. I paused, identifying the most important element. And I want to trust my own perception of relationships again. Dr. Reeves nodded. Those are reasonable, achievable goals. Let's develop a strategy focused on those outcomes rather than on changing Shirley's behavior or perspective. Over the next hour, we outlined a measured approach. I would address the professional plagiarism through official channels, documenting my original research and requesting proper attribution without directly accusing Shirley of deliberate theft. For mutual friendships, I would neither disparage Shirley nor correct her narrative unless directly asked. People who mattered would see the truth eventually. For Tyler, I would remain available but respect boundaries. Most challenging was rebuilding my trust in relationships. Dr. Reeves suggested I conduct a friendship audit, evaluating my other relationships for reciprocity and authentic connection. Look for evidence of mutuality, she advised. Equal initiation of contact, shared vulnerability, reciprocal support. Not perfect balance, but general equilibrium over time. That evening, I drafted a carefully worded email to the committee overseeing the community development presentation. I attached my original research, timestamps of creation, and evidence of my 2-year development process. The tone was professional rather than accusatory. I've noticed significant overlap with my research and would appreciate appropriate attribution. For my personal boundaries, I created a simple framework. I would not discuss Shirley with others unless necessary for clarification. I would not check her social media. I would engage in social events regardless of her presence, neither seeking nor avoiding interaction. Most importantly, I began the friendship audit Dr. Reeves had suggested. The results were illuminating and reassuring. While I had a tendency toward caretaking in all my relationships, most featured genuine reciprocity. My college roommate Patricia had supported me through my mother's illness, while I had helped her through a difficult pregnancy. My neighbor Michael and I had an easy, balanced friendship based on mutual interests and occasional practical support. These healthy relationships had been overshadowed by the intensity of my friendship with Shirley, but they hadn't disappeared. They could now be nurtured and prioritized. I was creating a contact list of these balanced friendships when my doorbell rang. A courier handed me an envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Shirley's attorney, claiming I was harassing her by interfering with professional opportunities and contacting her son against explicit wishes. The legal intimidation might once have devastated me. Now, having done my homework, I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. The letter held no actual legal merit. I had contacted the research committee, not Shirley, and Tyler had initiated our only contact. It was designed to frighten me into silence about the research theft. I forwarded the letter to a lawyer friend for advice, then continued with my evening plans: dinner with Patricia, my first social outing since the café incident. As we caught up over pasta, I realized how much of my social energy had been consumed by Shirley's constant crises. Without those demands, I could now invest in mutually nurturing connections. "You seem different," Patricia observed. "More present, somehow." I considered this. I'm learning to value friendships that go both ways. The next morning, I received responses from both my lawyer friend and the research committee. The legal letter was, as I suspected, unenforceable intimidation with no grounds for actual legal action. The committee, meanwhile, had reviewed my documentation and found it compelling enough to require Shirley to either properly attribute the research or withdraw from the presentation. I felt no triumph, only relief that my professional work would be protected without a direct confrontation. The strategy was working, addressing necessary boundaries while avoiding the emotional quagmire of trying to make Shirley acknowledge her behavior. That afternoon, I sent a brief, factual response to Shirley's attorney, advised by my lawyer friend. I have not contacted Ms. Reynolds directly and have no intention of doing so. Any professional overlap has been addressed through appropriate channels. No further communication is necessary. As I sealed the envelope, I realized I was no longer seeking Shirley's validation or recognition of our friendship. The strategy wasn't about winning against her, it was about reclaiming my narrative, my work, and my capacity for genuine connection. For the first time since that devastating conversation at the café, I felt something like peace. Not because the hurt had disappeared, but because I was charting a path forward that didn't depend on someone else's acknowledgement of my worth. The industry conference had been marked on my calendar for months, long before Shirley's declaration that we were never really friends. Now it loomed as the inevitable first public encounter since our falling out. 3 days of workshops, presentations, and networking events in close quarters with no easy way to avoid each other. "Remember your boundaries," Dr. Reeves had advised during our session the day before. Professional courtesy, nothing more or less. Your goal isn't to win her approval or prove anything to onlookers. I repeated this mantra as I checked into the hotel, scanning the lobby for Shirley's familiar figure. The strategy was clear. I would neither seek nor avoid interaction. I would engage professionally if necessary. I would not be drawn into personal discussions or public drama. My research presentation had been rescheduled after the committee's investigation, now with full attribution of my work. Shirley had apparently chosen to withdraw rather than present with proper credits. A small professional victory, but not one I took pleasure in. I spotted her first at the opening reception, holding court among a group of industry leaders. Our eyes met briefly across the room before she deliberately turned away, laughing a little too loudly at something someone had said. The message was clear. I was beneath acknowledgement. "Nancy." A warm voice broke through my thoughts. James Chen, the urban development director I'd interviewed extensively for my research, approached with a genuine smile. "I've been hoping to catch you. That community revitalization framework you developed is exactly what we've been looking for." We fell into easy conversation about implementation possibilities, drawing others into the discussion. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Shirley watching, her expression unreadable. Later, as I headed to my room, Shirley and I ended up alone in the elevator. The silence was charged with unspoken history. "You didn't need to make such a fuss about the research," she finally said, eyes fixed on the elevator doors. "I would have given you credit eventually." I took a measured breath. My work is important to me. Proper attribution matters. "Always so serious," she sighed, with the dismissive tone I now recognized as her defense mechanism when confronted with her own behavior. "This is why people find you difficult, Nancy." The elevator doors opened on my floor. As I stepped out, I turned briefly. "Good night, Shirley. Good luck with your presentation tomorrow." Professional courtesy. Nothing more or less. The next morning, I delivered my presentation to a packed room, my research finally shared under my own name. The response was enthusiastic, with several organizations expressing interest in pilot programs. As I fielded questions afterward, I noticed Shirley slip into the back of the room, arms crossed. When the session ended, she approached while I was gathering my materials. "Impressive work," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I always told you that you should be more confident about your ideas." The rewriting of history was so blatant it was almost laughable. After years of dismissing my research as too academic and not practical enough, she was now positioning herself as my champion. "Thank you," I replied simply, neither accepting nor challenging her revision. Later that day, I received a text from Tyler. "Mom says you gave her a cold shoulder at the conference. Everything okay?" I recognized the triangulation attempt and responded carefully, "Everything's fine." We spoke briefly and professionally. "How are your classes going?" The redirect worked. Tyler launched into updates about his college experience, the subtle attempt to draw me into conflict with Shirley forgotten. On the final day of the conference, I was approached by the director of a major urban renewal project. "Your presentation was exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "We'd like to discuss bringing you on as a consultant for our next phase." As we exchanged contact information, I saw Shirley watching from across the room, her expression darkening. The professional opportunity, a significant one, had come my way rather than hers. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a text from Shirley herself. "We should clear the air." Coffee after the closing session. The invitation was so unexpected I almost laughed aloud. After weeks of legal threats and public snubs, a consulting opportunity had suddenly made me worth speaking to again. "I have a flight to catch," I replied truthfully. "Another time, perhaps." The execution of my strategy, maintaining professional boundaries, focusing on my work, avoiding both confrontation and reconciliation, had shifted the dynamic between us. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I wasn't dropping everything to accommodate Shirley's sudden interest in connection. As I packed my suitcase that evening, I realized something profound had changed. The gnawing pain of Shirley's dismissal had transformed into something quieter, a sadness for what had never truly existed rather than grief for what I'd lost. I had executed the plan developed with Dr. Reeves perfectly. Protected my professional work, maintained dignity in public encounters, set boundaries around communication, and redirected energy toward healthier connections. But the most successful execution had been internal. I had finally stopped seeking validation from someone incapable of providing it. On the flight home, I declined a glass of wine from the flight attendant and instead raised my water bottle in a silent toast to myself. Not for winning against Shirley, but for reclaiming my own worth from the wreckage of a friendship that had existed only in my perception. The birthday card with "Soul Sisters Forever" no longer felt like a cruel joke. It was simply evidence of a performance I'd mistaken for reality, a mistake I wouldn't make again. The community center's conference room was packed for the Urban Renewal Committee meeting, faces I recognized alongside city officials I'd never met. I hadn't expected Shirley to be there, but perhaps I should have. Her consulting firm had recently been highlighted in the local business journal, specifically for work in community development, my area of expertise. She sat across the table, perfectly composed in a tailored blazer, offering me a tight smile that communicated nothing beyond basic acknowledgement. 6 months had passed since the café conversation that had shattered my understanding of our decade-long friendship. 6 months of careful boundaries, professional distance, and internal healing. "Ms. Parker will present the initial findings from the neighborhood assessment," the committee chair announced. Nodding in my direction, I distributed my report and began the presentation. I noticed Shirley's expression shift from polite interest to poorly concealed alarm. The data I was presenting, gathered through months of community interviews and careful analysis, directly contradicted recommendations her firm had made to the city council. These findings suggest that the proposed commercial development would displace approximately 38% of current residents, I explained, highlighting the relevant statistics. The community has expressed clear preference for mixed-use development that preserves existing housing while creating economic opportunities. A councilwoman frowned, leafing through both my report and what I assumed was Shirley's previous presentation. This contradicts the Reynolds Group assessment substantially. Ms. Reynolds, how do you account for the discrepancy? I braced myself for the familiar tactics, dismissal of my methodology, questioning of my expertise, subtle undermining of my credibility. Instead, Shirley looked momentarily lost, unprepared for direct challenge. Ms. Parker's approach is more academic, she finally said, falling back on her usual criticism. Our assessment considered practical market realities. By market realities, do you mean the preferences of the development corporation that commissioned your report? The question came from a community activist seated near the window. Because they stand to make significant profit from the commercial rezoning. The meeting devolved into pointed questions about methodology, data sources, and potential conflicts of interest. I remained professional, sticking to the facts while Shirley grew increasingly defensive. When the committee chair finally called for a brief recess, I escaped to the hallway for a moment of quiet. Your research was thorough. I turned to find Shirley standing behind me, arms crossed. For a moment, I glimpsed something unfamiliar in her expression, respect, perhaps, or at least recognition. It's important to get this right, I said simply. People's homes are at stake. She nodded, then hesitated. Nancy, I've been meaning to talk to you about everything. This isn't the appropriate time or place, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I know, but her professional mask slipped, revealing unexpected vulnerability. The things I said at the cafe. I didn't mean them the way they sounded. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation I'd come to expect. Instead, I saw something I'd rarely witnessed in our 10 years of friendship, genuine discomfort, perhaps even regret. How did you mean them, Shirley? She glanced around, lowering her voice. I was going through something. The promotion, the pressure. I felt like I needed to distance myself from before. From before, I repeated. You mean from cancer, from divorce, from when you needed help. From when I was useful. She flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? I kept my voice level, conscious of our professional surroundings. You told me we were never really friends after 10 years of me being there for everything. You try to take credit for my research. You sent me a cease and desist letter. What part of that is unfair to point out? The committee chair appeared in the doorway. We're reconvening in 2 minutes. Shirley glanced toward the conference room, then back to me. This conversation isn't over. Actually, it is, I replied quietly. You made your position clear 6 months ago. I've accepted it and moved on. Back in the meeting, the committee ultimately voted to conduct an independent assessment, effectively putting both our recommendations on hold. As we gathered our materials afterward, Shirley approached me again. Tyler asks about you, she said, a transparent attempt to maintain connection. He misses you. The mention of Tyler, the boy I'd helped raise for a decade, pierced through my careful armor. He knows how to reach me. He always will. Nancy. Shirley's voice took on the plaintive tone I recognized from countless past crises. I made a mistake, okay? Can we just, Ms. Parker? The community activist who had spoken earlier approached, hand extended. Your assessment was excellent. We'd like to invite you to present at the Neighborhood Association meeting next week. I accepted the invitation, aware of Shirley watching this exchange with thinly veiled frustration. When I turned back to her, she had composed herself, professional mask firmly back in place. You've done well for yourself, she observed, with a slight edge I couldn't quite interpret. I've always done well, Shirley. You just never noticed when it didn't benefit you directly. The words weren't meant to wound, merely to state a truth I'd finally accepted. Shirley's friendship had always been conditional, available only when it served her needs or image. My value had always been tied to my usefulness, never to my inherent worth as a person she genuinely cared for. As she walked away, shoulders stiff with unspoken words, I realized that the reckoning I had unconsciously sought, her acknowledgement of what our friendship had truly been, would never come in the form I had once hoped for. The closest I would get was this moment of discomfort, this brief piercing of her carefully constructed narrative, and somehow that was enough. Not because it validated my experience, but because I no longer needed that validation to recognize my own worth. The reckoning wasn't Shirley finally seeing the truth. It was me finally accepting it. Aunt Nancy. Tyler's voice carried across the university quad as he waved enthusiastically, breaking away from a group of fellow students to jog toward me. At 20, he had his mother's sharp features softened by a warmth that was entirely his own. "Sorry I'm late," he said, enveloping me in a quick hug. "Study group ran long." "No problem." I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. "I've just been enjoying the campus." "Your mother would hate how much time I spend on college quads these days." It had been exactly 1 year since that devastating conversation at the café. 1 year since Shirley had casually informed me that our decade of friendship had been, in her eyes, nothing more than a mutually beneficial arrangement. Tyler and I had settled into a careful routine, monthly lunch meetings that existed outside his relationship with Shirley. We never discussed her directly, an unspoken agreement that preserved both his relationship with his mother and our connection with each other. As we settled at a small cafe near campus, Tyler updated me on his classes, his internship, his girlfriend. Normal, everyday topics that would have been part of our regular conversations in the life before. I listened attentively, offering advice when asked, mostly just enjoying his company. "So," he said finally, stirring his coffee with uncharacteristic hesitation, "Mom got let go from the consulting firm last month." I kept my expression neutral. I'd heard rumors of budget cuts across several firms, but hadn't known Shirley was affected. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is she doing okay?" "Not really," he admitted. "The development project fell through after that independent assessment backed your findings. She kind of got blamed for the whole thing." He glanced up. "She's been asking about you, you know." I nodded, unsurprised. Shirley's pattern had always been predictable, reaching out when she needed support, creating crises that required assistance, manufacturing reasons for connection when her resources ran low. "Tyler, I appreciate you telling me, but that's between your mother and her former employers." "I know, He hesitated. "She's struggling, Aunt Nancy. Really struggling. And I know what happened between you two is bad, though neither of you will tell me exactly what. But you were always the one who helped her through the hard times." The old pull was there, the instinct to rescue, to support, to drop everything and rush to Shirley's aid. A year ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. Now, I recognize the pattern for what it was. "Your mother is resilient," I said gently. "She'll find her way through this, just like she has other challenges." Tyler studied me for a moment. "You've changed." "I've grown," I corrected with a small smile. "There's a difference." After lunch, I walked Tyler back to his dorm, our conversation shifting to lighter topics. As we said goodbye, he surprised me with another tight hug. "Thanks for sticking around," he said quietly. "For not disappearing from my life even when things got complicated." "I'll always be here for you, Tyler. That's never going to change." As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the year of transformation that had followed Shirley's casual dismissal of our friendship. The professional opportunities that had opened up once I stopped arranging my schedule around her emergencies. The new friendships I'd developed, genuine, reciprocal relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependence. The consulting practice I'd established, now thriving with projects that aligned with my values. Losing what I'd thought was my closest friendship had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. Like a forest after fire, new growth had emerged from the scorched landscape of that loss, healthier, stronger, more authentically aligned with who I truly was. My phone buzzed with a text from Shirley. I heard you met with Tyler today. I really need to talk to you. Can we meet? A year ago, I would have immediately responded, rearranging my schedule to accommodate her request. Now, I simply slip the phone back into my pocket. If Shirley truly needed to communicate with me, she could reach out directly with a specific purpose, not through Tyler and vague urgency. The following week, I arrived at my office to find Shirley waiting in the lobby. She looked different, the polished professional veneer somewhat dimmed, dark circles visible beneath carefully applied concealer. Nancy, she stood as I approached. I know I should have called first, but I figured you wouldn't agree to see me. What can I help you with, Shirley? I asked, maintaining a professional tone. Can we talk somewhere private? I hesitated, then nodded toward my office. Once inside with the door closed, Shirley seemed to deflate slightly, the performance of confidence slipping. I lost my job, she said bluntly. Tyler mentioned that. I'm sorry to hear it. She paced the small space. The development project was supposed to be my big success. After the independent assessment supported your findings, the whole thing fell apart. They needed someone to blame. I waited, suspecting there was more to this unexpected visit than sharing her professional setbacks. I need a reference, she finally said, for a position at Urban Solutions. They respect your work, and a recommendation from you would carry weight. The request was so perfectly Shirley that I almost laughed. After everything, the dismissal of our friendship, the attempted theft of my research, the legal threats, the professional undermining, she had come to ask for my help, framed as always in terms of what she needed. I'll need to think about that, I said carefully. Urban Solutions does important work. Any recommendation I provide would need to be honest and thorough. She flinched slightly at the implied evaluation. Nancy, about what happened between us, Shirley, I interrupted gently. We don't need to revisit that. You made your position clear, and I've accepted it. But that's just it, she insisted, an edge of desperation entering her voice. I didn't mean it. Not really. I was going through something, trying to reinvent myself professionally, and you represented the past. I considered her words, recognizing the familiar pattern of justification without true accountability. The past where I supported you through cancer and divorce? Where I helped raise Tyler and covered your bills when you couldn't. That past. She had the grace to look ashamed. I know how it sounds. It sounds like the truth, I said simply. And that's okay. Relationships change. People grow apart. But honesty matters, Shirley. What you said at the cafe, that we were never really friends, that wasn't about growing apart. That was about rewriting history to suit a narrative where you didn't have to feel gratitude or obligation. Shirley stared at me, momentarily speechless. In 10 years of friendship, I had never spoken to her with such direct honesty. I'll think about the reference, I continued. Email me the details of the position, and I'll let you know my decision. She nodded, clearly recognizing the dismissal. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I miss you. The real you, not just what you could do for me. I offered a small smile. I hope that's true, Shirley. I really do. After she left, I sat at my desk, turning over the interaction in my mind. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apologies, no promises to rebuild what had been broken. Just a moment of honesty between two people who had once been enormously important to each other, and somehow, that felt like the most appropriate closure possible. That evening, I hosted a dinner party at my apartment, something I'd rarely done when my social life had revolved around Shirley's needs. Around the table sat friends both old and new, relationships characterized by mutual respect and genuine affection. As conversation and laughter flowed, I felt a sense of peace that had been long in coming. The birthday card with Soul Sisters Forever was no longer on my nightstand. I had finally placed it in a memory box alongside other artifacts of a friendship that had shaped a decade of my life, for better and worse. Not discarded entirely, that would deny the real care and support that had existed alongside the imbalance, but properly contextualized as part of my past, not my present or future. What remained was not bitterness, but clarity. The ability to recognize both one-sided dynamics and genuine connection. The courage to establish boundaries and the wisdom to invest in relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. We were never really friends, Shirley had said that day at the café. Perhaps in her way, she had been right. What we had wasn't friendship as I now understood it, equal, reciprocal, authentic. It had been something else entirely, a dynamic of perpetual giving and taking that had fulfilled different needs for each of us. The true renewal wasn't finding another best friend to replace Shirley. It was discovering a more authentic way of connecting with others and with myself. It was learning that loyalty isn't measured by what you're willing to sacrifice, but by the mutual respect that makes such calculations unnecessary. I looked around at the gathered faces. I silently thanked Shirley for the unintended gift her dismissal had ultimately provided, the opportunity to discover what real friendship actually felt like.